Okay, let's jump right into it. The story of Joseph.
Yes.
It's one we probably all know in some form. You know, the boy with the coat of many colors
Sold into slavery.
by his brothers faces unimaginable hardship, only to rise through, well, sheer resilience and maybe divine favor
You could say that.
to become second in command in Egypt. It's kind of the ultimate underdog story, isn't it? The personal triumph.
It certainly is a personal story, an incredible one, really. Survival, success against all odds.
Yeah.
But, if that was the only story, the only reason it's there, why does Genesis spend so much time on it?
That's a good point. It's huge, right? Chapters 37 are right through to 50.
Exactly. A massive chunk of the book. So it makes you wonder, is there more going on here than just, one guy's incredible journey?
Like what?
Well, could this really personal story also contain something bigger? Maybe a blueprint or a design for something societal? Perhaps even a model for building a more functional, maybe even a more just society.
Okay, now that's the fascinating idea we want to explore in this deep dive. Moving beyond just the familiar plot points.
Right.
And looking at what Joseph actually did in Egypt, not just as an individual surviving, but maybe through the lens of the sources we have, seeing if they show a deliberate effort, an effort to design a whole new system for the entire nation.
And think about connecting this back to that promise made way earlier in Genesis to Abraham.
The blessing for all nations.
Exactly. That through his lineage, all nations would somehow be blessed. So Joseph's actions in Egypt, a foreign land, remember, not Israel, could they be an early example? An example of how that blessing starts to work itself out, tangibly, systemically, affecting a whole society.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then. Using the sources to look past the saga we know and uncover these, well, possibly hidden layers, the systemic stuff, what the Joseph narrative might teach us about building a better world, maybe even today. So let's unpack this. This idea that Joseph wasn't just, a clever administrator who was good at storing grain.
Yeah, it goes deeper. A key detail that sort of jumps out is in the text itself, Genesis 47.21.
Okay.
It describes what Joseph did during the famine relief effort. It says he removed the people to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end.
Remove the people to cities. That doesn't sound like just handing out rations.
Not at all. That phrase, remove the people, it really implies a massive national project, a huge reorganization.
Okay, remove the people. That sounds really significant. Maybe even a forced movement, a huge relocation, redistribution. What do the sources imply about the scale and, well, the nature of what he was doing?
Exactly. It suggests something far beyond simple logistics. I mean, think about the power Pharaoh gave him.
The signet ring, total authority.
Right. Basically run the whole show. Now, if his job was just, managing grain silos, he wouldn't need that kind of sweeping power.
Good point.
It strongly suggests he needed the authority to fundamentally change the whole system, the structure of the country.
And this is where maybe the usual reading gets a bit challenged. Think about Joseph's own life.
He'd been a slave, then a prisoner. He lived at the absolute bottom of Egyptian society.
He would have seen it all firsthand. The sources really point this out. He'd have seen the huge gap, rich and poor.
The precariousness of it all for ordinary people.
Their total vulnerability to a crisis, like this famine. He wasn't looking at it from a palace window initially.
Right. So given that perspective, was his main goal just getting through the famine, or was he maybe motivated to design something new, a system where everyone, the vast majority, could live with some basic stability, some security?
The sources lean towards that second option. They suggest he wasn't just reacting, he was enacting a design for a whole new societal system.
Wow, okay, so what might that have looked like? What kind of concrete things are we talking about?
Well, the sources speculate about really large-scale infrastructure, things like building massive reservoirs, canals across the country, not just for irrigation maybe, but for water management during drought.
Centralized water control, possibly. And it definitely involved a fundamental change in land ownership, bringing it all under Pharaoh's control.
Oh, okay.
And maybe even building new, safer housing, moving people away from, say, the flood-prone areas near the Nile.
That's way beyond just famine prep. That's huge infrastructure planning, social engineering almost.
It really is. Large-scale infrastructure plus social restructuring.
And the perfect opportunity, the political cover, comes through Pharaoh's dream.
Exactly. Which only Joseph can interpret. That gives him the mandate.
The opening.
Right. Joseph isn't just solving a puzzle. The dream becomes the catalyst, the, undeniable reason for him to propose and then execute this massive national reform project. all under Pharaoh's authority, of course,
And the 7 good years?
weren't just for stockpiling grain. The sources suggest that was the crucial window, the time when they had the resources, the manpower, to actually build this new system.
Yeah.
Digging canals, setting up the new land system, maybe building new towns. The scale implied is just immense.
Okay, now here's a part that I think might confuse people reading the text. Genesis 47.25. The people's reaction.
Ah, yes.
Despite this massive upheaval, losing their land, potentially being moved, they say things like, "You have saved our lives, we will be servants to Pharaoh." They sound grateful.
They do.
Why weren't they resentful? How does the source explain that reaction? What were the actual benefits they got?
That reaction is really counterintuitive if you only look at it as them losing land or freedom. But if you look at the practical gains, the things highlighted in the source material, it starts to make more sense, at least from the perspective of the average person back then.
Okay, tell us about those gains. What did the average Egyptian actually get out of Joseph's plan?
Well, first, the sources suggest that many, maybe even most Egyptians, didn't actually own land before this whole crisis.
Really? Tenant farmers, laborers, maybe?
Something like that. So under Joseph's system, they were actually provided with land by Pharaoh to farm. It gave them a livelihood within this new structure.
Okay.
Second, and this is critical, they were guaranteed survival. Through a catastrophic long famine, they got food. They didn't have to eat their seed grain, which would have been, disaster for the future.
So, escaping starvation, number one.
Oh.
And getting access to land they might not have had before. Okay, significant.
Hugely significant. Third, as we touched on, there's speculation they might have been moved to safer homes, maybe better built housing in these new planned towns, improving their living conditions, protecting them from things like the annual Nile floods.
Better housing, safety.
Fourth, the tax rate. Joseph set it at a fixed 20% of their produce.
20%.
Now, the sources suggest that before this, local taxes might have been much heavier, or at least more arbitrary, less predictable. This 20% was lighter for many, maybe, and crucially, it was consistent, dependable.
Predictability must have been huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And fifth, maybe the biggest societal shift. The sources suggest they moved from a society with potentially vast inequalities, huge wealth gaps, deep social divisions, maybe even forms of local debt slavery, to a much more level playing field. Everyone, from the poorest peasant to maybe even lower nobles who lost their estates, they all became servants of Pharaoh.
So, a kind of leveling.
In a way. Now, it wasn't freedom as we think of it, obviously. Be carried to the extreme inequality and vulnerability that might have existed before, it could have been a significant improvement.
Okay, so if you put yourself in their shoes, facing starvation, living in maybe a very unequal society, this wasn't just being controlled. It felt like a fundamental reform that improved their survival chances and maybe their long-term stability.
That seems to be the implication. The sources even suggest some interpretations believe the people worked, enthusiastically on these big national projects. Why? Because they saw the direct benefit for themselves, for their families, for their communities.
They saw it as being saved.
Precisely. They weren't just surviving. They saw their lives, their future, being fundamentally secured, maybe even improved by this new system Joseph put in place.
So this deep dive really suggests the Joseph story, when you look at it through this particular lens from these sources. It's way more than just a personal success story, more than just one man's incredible character arc.
Right. It's presented almost as a concrete example of God's salvation or blessing, but working in the world. Not just spiritual salvation in the afterlife, but a functional, tangible societal system.
A system that ensures basic survival for everyone.
Yes, and works towards creating a more just, more equitable community, especially compared to what might have been there before. The old vulnerabilities, the old inequalities, this focus on fixing real human problems, famine, inequality, insecurity, that's presented as a key part of the concept of salvation being explored here.
And that really does challenge the simpler reading, doesn't it? It positions Joseph not just as, a wise hero or a successful immigrant who made good, but fundamentally as a systemic reformer. Someone who used a crisis, yes, but used it to tackle deep structural problems in that society, and designed and implemented a new system aiming for a better, more secure life for everyone in Egypt.
And if you then connect that to the bigger picture, this perspective encourages us to look at these ancient texts differently.
Yeah.
Not just as, abstract spiritual guides or interesting history,
but as
potential sources of really profound wisdom about how to build better societies, how to address fundamental human problems here and now.
This has been, yeah, a really powerful deep dive into a story I thought I knew, revealing some quite unexpected layers. Thank you for guiding us through these insights from the sources.
It's a story that it truly keeps on giving, doesn't it, the more you look?
It seems so.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, this perspective leaves us with a pretty significant question, I think. Something for you, the listener, to ponder. If the Joseph story, viewed this way, systemically, offers a kind of ancient model for tackling fundamental societal problems, inequality, insecurity, and for creating a more just community focused on everyone's well-being, well, what are the Joseph projects needed today? In our own communities, in our society.
Yeah. What are the deep systemic issues we're facing now?
Whether it's wealth gaps, food insecurity, housing crises, access to healthcare, whatever it might be. And how might we approach addressing them with a similar kind of focus? A focus on designing systems for the fundamental well-being of everyone.
That's definitely something to think about.
It is something for you to think about long after this deep dive is over.